All right, this is John Krysinsky, Pittsburgh Soccer Now. We are on Pittsburgh Sports Live tonight. I got one of our good friends in the media box who's been at just about almost every Riverhounds game with me, Alex. Um, I just pronounced it perfectly.
I know it was perfect.
Fydryszewski.
Got it. Yes, let's go.
Alex Fydryszewski. I'm getting there. I'm getting it
We'll
better.
be good. It's all good, John. It's great to be on here with you.
Well, Alex, it's a long season, 32 game regular season, and then it comes down to two playoff matches. One goes the Riverhounds' way. They put it all out there. They put their heart out there in the last week against Birmingham. Tonight, it's interesting. The teams with the leads are the teams that are always seem to be susceptible, playing against a team that's just desperate and then can turn the tables of the match and then turn the momentum. And I really felt like that's kind of what happened tonight. But the Riverhounds lose to Louisville City 2-2 in regulation, and then, of course, 5-3 in penalty kicks. Alex, I believe you were at one of the locations where some of the Hounds fans were gathering.
Yeah.
What was the initial reaction?
I was at Mike's Beer Bar.
Yeah.
Great crowd over there. They had probably about 250 people there. I mean, it was wall to wall. It was a wild atmosphere. Everybody was. I think when the match started, there was kind of a nervous energy to begin with, because anytime you get into a playoff situation, it's one and done. You got to win the match in order, or you're going home. And it was this roller coaster of emotion, I think, for everyone in the in the crowd. I was sitting next to Amadeo from La Mega Media, who you've had on previously, and he and I are just, man, it's just this up and down the whole match. And you get the goal, you get the second goal, and after the second goal, coming out of the half, there's just this vibe in the building that everyone's like, this could be the night. Like, we may not need the extra 30 minutes. And on the blink of an eye, the whole
Yeah.
match gets turned on its head, and you could just feel the energy just get sucked out of the whole bar, that everyone's like, oh no, here we go again. And especially, I think it was tough because they had looked so good for the first 50, 60, 70 minutes of that match. And I know, I'm sure we'll go into it, and then just to see it on its head in 90 seconds, it was tough.
It's tough. I think people out there have been critical of the Hounds' ability to hold on to leads this year, and they showed that. There were times where they couldn't hold on to leads, and it came up to bite them again tonight. But honestly, like, the way I looked at it, they picked their spots in terms of getting forward. But Bob says this all the time, like, against Louisville, you have to match possession, or else you're just going to get worn down. And even though this Louisville team's a little different, I think they're a little bit more direct sometimes. They were trying to really get
For
forward
sure, yeah.
around the wings and on the width, but the Hounds were shutting that down. So Louisville just started to just send cross after cross after cross, and it was nonstop. And 49, I think the end of the match, it was 49-14 or something, or even 49-7. I'm sorry. Oh,
Yeah.
no, actually, I'm trying to think. Yeah, 14. The Hounds had a flurry there in the second period of extra time, but really at one point it was 47-7.
Yeah, and I feel like that, as the match wore on, as you had said, kind of that direct play, and then trying to just hoof in those crosses, they started to get more frequent. You could see that they were starting to wear the Riverhounds, the back line, down a little bit.
Yeah, and I think there's only so much that, under that much pressure, they just had to withstand it for 10 more minutes. And it's one of those things where the floodgates kind of opened, like you said, for 90 seconds. There was and not only that, a set piece, where the ball kind of just bounces around. And, Waite's been so good in reaction saves, but even I don't think anybody's stopping that second shot.
No, that second shot, that's a gimme right there. That was, yeah, I think, and credit to Waite too. He played fantastic tonight. He came up with several big saves to get them to penalty kicks. I think there was the one in the I believe it was the first period of extra time where he kind of went full extension to
Corbin
swipe that
Bell.
ball away.
Mhm.
Played very well this evening, and I think he's played well in net all season. He cemented himself as the
Mhm.
starter, and I think he didn't look back after that point.
Yeah, I mean that Corbin Bone in extra time had it looked like a scissor. It kind of went to sideways, and it was a one time. I mean that ball had so much pace, and somehow, wait, I don't know how he got because he was standing up and he had to get all the way down
Get all the way down, yeah.
with his hand, and he stopped it. I think he was fantastic in the playoffs, and he deserves. He'll be one of those guys that, the Hounds hold their contract option. I think it's a no-brainer. You bring him back.
I'd be shocked if
But
they did.
yeah, so we'll get into that maybe now, but even later into the offseason. But still, they got the 2-0 lead. They were sharp getting forward. They only had two or three shots, and they had two goals. And that seems like the mojo though for Bob, especially on the road, especially in these games against teams like Louisville City in the past. At Tampa, sometimes they would kind of stun those teams on the road and win some of those road games in the Lilly era. But it just they couldn't hold on for 90 minutes. I think that's going to be something that a lot of people are going to be upset about. Um, I don't know. I just think that they started to get stretched, and it was just a matter of time.
Yeah, I think tactically you hit the nail on the head. I know that I'm one of those folks at least in our media group who goes to the Hounds games, who's been kind of critical about that over the course of the season, about their inability to find, I don't know if you want to call it the mental toughness or whatever it is, to close out games. I feel like sometimes it was a bounce of the ball, even, just something that's out of their control. And it just kind of kept going the whole year, and they were never able to get out of that. And I feel like at least myself and some of the fans I would talk to, even some of the folks who were at the bar tonight, were like, at some point they have to figure this out. But it's like, we're 30 games in, we're 32 games in, we're 34 games into the playoffs now. We still haven't figured this out. But I think, as far as you said, to try to hold on like that towards the end when you're just getting the barrage of pressure from a talented Louisville team. And I think you could see it, towards the end of regulation, even where Danny Griffin, he just looked exhausted out there because he had been box to box the entire night, and he was chasing the ball sideline to sideline too. So it was a heavy shift for him. Canardo Forbes put in a masterful shift, and at his age, you can ask you maybe ask the question: did we see the last of him? I hope not. But if this was the end for Canardo Forbes at his age, he went out leaving it all on the field.
Absolutely.
I think
brilliant through ball.
Yeah.
On the end of that tremendous little connection of passes. That was a signature Forbes delivery.
It was excellent. And I think they had their chances too, John. I feel like, beyond the goals there, they only had a limited number of shots, but they created some dangerous situations. There was that offsides call. That was a bang bang play there. And I think it was Kizza that made the run.
Mm-hmm.
That was enough. They had Louisville in spots here and there. And I think you made a good point saying kind of Bob Lilly's philosophy away from home. They did a good job of absorbing what they needed to absorb, and then to try to create for themselves
100%.
Final third going the other way.
100%. And they were efficient in that because they weren't, the moments that they had, yeah, even the offside play. I mean, it was inches. We're talking inches. It was so close. I couldn't tell. But the other thing, the PK, if we go back to the Shane Wheat foul, I mean, it was clearly, like, if you looked at it, it was shoulder to shoulder, but it seemed like it was enough contact with the Louisville player with the ball at his foot that I think the ref can't. I don't know. Just my takeaway was like, I didn't think he could ignore that call. I know it's tough because it was shoulder to shoulder, but
that was the general vibe at Mike's as well. Most of the people that were around us, including Mike himself, when we look, they at first glance were like, "Ooh, I don't know about that," and then they showed the replay with the different angle, and we were like, "Oh, it's hard for the referee not to make that call because there's a lot of contact in there." And his hands behind him, and it's like, did the referee see his arm behind the play and go, "Oh, I wonder if he got him. That's a penalty kick." And without the assistance of VAR, it's hard to get into that. But I think you're right. And everybody at the bar kind of said, like, there's enough in it where you can't really argue it. The referee's call was, it's a 50-50 call, but it's justifiable if he calls it. It's justifiable if he doesn't.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for us, he called it.
Right. But, I'll still say this. They kind of collected themselves because that's a possibility where, that they could lose the whole thing right there just based on momentum and everything. I mean, when Louisville scored the first goal, you could just sense it. And we're watching it from afar. The crowd, which seemed down and dead all night. We know Louisville's got issues. They have 8,000, only had half capacity tonight. There's some issues going on in the city and with the organization. And so the fan base is a little down on them right now, but not necessarily the players in the franchise, the team itself,
the management,
the players. But but that's a whole nother story. But I give them credit because they're it's interesting too, because they have this veteran. They still have the Cameron Lancasters and the Jimenezes and the Paulo Del Piccolo. These guys are just been through the USL wars, and but they got the 19-year-old, 20-year-old kids that are playing key roles at the end of the match. And one of the columns that I wrote about the Hounds this past week was it was really nice to see them turn to the younger players last week, and Bob really using his depth, which he didn't do in previous playoffs. He was hesitant against Louisville City in the past. He only used 2 subs in the 2019 playoff game that went to extra time.
Yeah.
And he only used 3 in the next year's game when they had 5 subs available in 2020. So this year, I know people like to just bash the manager. It's an easy target. But I thought Bob was brilliant last week in terms of managing. Obviously, the substitute of Kiza for Canardo Forbes is going to go down in the lore of one of the great subs of all time. I mean,
absolutely.
And then we saw what Kiza could do he's just such a motor in the extra time. So just to have a guy like that was great. So I think Bob did it. I thought the Hounds coaching staff did a good job to really through these playoffs. I
think they did as well. And I think, because we got the real inside scoop in those press conferences throughout the season. To me, at least, Bob Lilly is not almost like I guess kind of like a soccer version of Mike Tomlin. He's not that way. He's not we're going to go train and we're going to practice and we're going to lift some weights and then we're going to come back next week and I'm going to adjust some things and we're going to do it again. Kind of like some kind of cyclical thing that you get from a lot of coaches. Bob is for those who've never been to the press conference, you ask Bob one question, half an hour later, you're still getting the explanation about in the 38th minute. I really thought that, Danny needed to slide over and help, cover a little more. And I think, when you're allowed that insight into the manager's mind,
yes,
we then can see like, okay, well, this is how Bob wants them to play. And he has the personnel. And it's like Bob has said, like, we have to figure out how to get him to the next step. But I think over 240 minutes of the playoffs, he planned, and by and large, they executed.
They executed, and that's what he knew. He knew that was going to be the case, and they executed tonight for 80 minutes, and then they had a 3 or 4 minute letdown, and then they got their stuff together, and they got themselves in position to win the game at the end. They did put themselves in position to go to another penalty kick shootout. They put themselves in the exact same position they were in last week. And that's just how it is. You flip a coin almost when you're getting into, I mean, Danny Griffin's the one guy, right? He gets out there for the first shot. And, that they still made their kicks and they pushed it to the last kick. I mean, it wasn't, sometimes you'll see teams fall apart in those moments too. So you can't blame Danny Griffin. You can't blame the Hounds. I mean, it's just one of those things. You go to penalty kicks, it's a coin flip, really is.
You said about it, they put themselves in position to have an opportunity to win the match, and it was probably, once it hit 2-2, getting to penalties was the best situation that they could have put themselves in. And as you said, it's not like they lost this one 3-0, where they missed their first three. Louisville hit their first three, and it was a rout in the PKs. They hit 4 out of 5 from the spot, and like you said, maybe Danny does Danny open his hips up a little bit on the run? Maybe he telegraphs it a little bit, or could he have hit it a little bit harder or closer to the post? Sure, but you know what? At that point, you're playing with house money. You got your house money last week and won. Put your bets on the table, and Bob puts his cards down and is all in. And I think that the way this season ended, there really shouldn't be a lot of disappointment from the Riverhounds fans. I think obviously we would all want to win, and I know Tuffy put out a tweet not long ago. Looks like it was about half an hour ago, where he said, this one hurt. I'm gutted. I'm sorry. I wanted to bring a championship back. I think while we all echo that, we should also look at it and say, you know what? For all the questions that we asked over the course of the season about, where's the toughness? Where's the this? Where's the that? Where's the fight? It was certainly there in the last 2 games of the playoffs, and they showed, I think, the capabilities that they had, and the fight was certainly there. So there shouldn't be, fans shouldn't be upset. And I think there's a lot to look forward to, depending on whose contracts they exercise and who's in and out. And that's to be determined over the course of the next few months, obviously. But provided, if they can return a good chunk of the core again, there's no reason to think that they won't be back in the playoffs again next year, and certainly pushing on further in the regular season.
Well, and I want to touch on that before we wrap up, but I want to go back real quick, because you mentioned something very interesting about the Hounds, the way they played the last month of the season. You just talked about the last 2 games. If you look at the last month of the season, and there weren't a lot of great, I mean, there were some disappointing results, but they were playing against the top teams, the San Antonios, the Louisville, Birmingham, all these teams. And Bob kept saying over and over again, he really liked that they were playing at a much better level than they had even prior to that last stretch. And he liked how it was coming together. But what I saw was, I thought he really liked it. He knew that this team would have to win playoff games the way they played the last 2 playoff games. He knew that they would have to grind. It would be a grind. And tonight would have been a remarkable achievement to shut out Louisville. I was on the record saying it definitely at the end of the first half, this was a defensive masterpiece, because they were keeping Louisville. I mean, Louisville City could not do anything inside the box or anywhere near the box. They had 4 shots. Everything wasn't even close. And the Hounds were defending well on the, just keeping them on the perimeter. And it didn't last, but I mean, it didn't last. It lasted for a good bit of them. I thought defensively, they just played. They knew they had to scrap their way to probably penalty kicks a few times in the playoffs if they knew they had to keep moving on. And like I said, sometimes it goes their way, sometimes it doesn't. So that was just my thought when you said that, and the way they performed. And honestly, I think there are holes. In this year's team had holes. This year's team had weaknesses. And when Alex Dixon obviously his production just completely dropped. Like, he didn't have an assist or a goal in the last 2.5 months of the season. I mean, and you could tell even tonight when he had that one chance, he got wide. I mean, I think it could have been a 3-0 game, right? Yeah, at this point.
There was an opportunity for it.
He had that opportunity, and there was so much space, and he just sort of like hesitated. I was like, the Alex Dixon of 2015 Rochester Rhinos is that defender doesn't even have a chance to get near him, and he just, I mean, can he finish that? Probably. He's a great clinical finisher. So it just, that's what I mean. Like Alex Dixon, I don't know if, we see him again. I mean, great 2 years as a Riverhound, but, and like you said, Kenny is 33, I think now, but Kenny played the minutes and he never really slowed down. I thought he was up there in one of the top minutes played this year for the Hounds. So I think there are going to be some question marks. You bring some of these veteran players back. I mean, your veteran core is going to be Mertz, Griffin, Cicerone, and Dequa, like that, just those guys. And then your back line, I think you could keep some of those guys. You might tweak, you might maybe look for some upgrades, see what's out there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you really summed it up well. I look at Dixon, and I think you make some really good points. I don't know what kind of psychologically kind of went on with him towards the end of the season, or physically maybe there were some knocks that we didn't know about that slowed him down a little, or is father time starting to creep up on him as well, because as a winger at 31, 32 years old, that's tall ask. Sometimes that's when the legs start to go. Even the elite players, we're seeing that happen now with one of the greats of all time, Cristiano Ronaldo, who tends to, he always tended to shade himself out wide a little bit more. His game was based on power and speed. The power's still there. The old man strength has come for him, but the half a step isn't there anymore, and even for the best. So, could this be the end for Dixon? Possibly. I think, Canardo in the last 3 weeks of the season turned back the clock for me. And I know at the midpoint of the season, I had said, well, is he slowing down a little bit? Is he a step too slow to the ball? Is the game passed him by? Is he not a 90-minute guy anymore? Within the last 4 games, I look back now at Canardo Forbes and I say to myself, this is a guy who, depending on their wage budget, we don't know how that works for the Hounds necessarily behind the scenes. We're not privy to what the weekly wages are, but if it's on a reasonable number, is Canardo a guy who I would bring back as either a 50, 60-minute guy, or somebody who you can bring off the bench to close out matches in the last 20 to 30 minutes, provide tons of leadership? If that option's on the table, I would probably consider it, as long as he feels like he's up for, another go. And as you say about the core, those are must-haves. I think if you're going to try to build forward again next year, what you're going to get with Dequa. There's going to be a lot of movement. There's going to be a high energy level for him. Cicerone's going to give you everything he's got in the tank. And those two in the midfield, and Mertz and Danny Griffin, they're going to be your rocks. And in the back line, I agree. There's a couple of spots where they might be able to upgrade. I think specifically looking at the way they had to platoon a little bit this year, where Shane Wheat, who really is played more of a center back role prior to this, had to slide out wide. Maybe trying to find a right left back solution could be something they look at in the off season. But on the whole, the spine's solid.
Well, they wanted to start the season. They had Danny Rivera in the central midfield, and all of a sudden, but I forget who said this, but then he ended up having to go back to outside back. Dixon, essentially an outside back, really, tonight, and really towards the end of the season. And that might have been part of the reason why his production dropped a little bit, because the Hounds wanted to play, as we talked about, maybe just scrap a little bit more, not send as many numbers forward, and really rely on Cicerone and Mertz. Maybe the Mertz coming in and Dixon, like maybe that kind of shifted some things in terms of how they were thinking attacking pieces. But we could break it all down going in really hard into the off season, and I look forward to having more conversations about that. But yeah, and the elephant in the room too is the Dane Kelly. The few people brought that up this week and in this past few weeks, and it's like, look, the guy played 1 minute of one match in the last 10 games, and whether he fell out of favor, whether he had injury issues, the bottom line is that Albert Dequa supplanted himself, put himself in that role, and I think he was outstanding in the role that he was asked to play this year. And you have Edward Kiza now. Now here's the issue. Edward Kiza is going to be, the Hounds have no contract option on him. So he's a free agent basically as as of now. So I mean, he's a free agent because New England let him go. So I mean, will the Hounds make a push for get him? Sure. Will they? Can they afford to keep him? I don't know. I mean, geez. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of the top USL clubs would love to have an Edward Kiza, especially after he showed what he did in the playoffs. Um, we'll see. But the Hounds need that. They need somebody in addition to Dikwa and Cicerone, and I think maybe it's a young, guy like Kiza. Do you go out and get an experienced scorer that maybe doesn't let you down the stretch for whatever reasons? I don't know. We don't know what the Dane Kelly story was, but we just know that he was around the team. He was in the locker room. He was at the games, but he wasn't playing. He wasn't even in the 18.
Yeah, no, it wasn't, wasn't in the 18 quite a bit. And I think, again, we can speculate. We're not at training every day. You don't know. Was there a training issue? Was there an attitude issue? Were there injury issues? He's on the wrong side of 30, so you don't know. Was there a knock that wasn't healing? And they tried to see what they could do, and you just couldn't come back. I don't know. But I think there was a lot of hype around the signing for sure. All-time leading goal scorer in the USL Championship. There's certainly going to come with some hopes and expectations. But again, credit to Dikwa, who won the starting job. I mean, he made that his spot, and then the same with Kiza, who came on loan, and said, I'm much like I think Tommy Williamson did last year. Came in and said, I'm going to take this very seriously. I'm going to win a spot. And I may not, if I'm still a young guy, I'm going to learn whatever, but I'm going to win a spot. And if it puts the older player out, so be it. And he won that spot and performed very well this year.
And William Ayang as well. I mean, didn't play much during the season, but again, that's just probably the Dane Kelly spot. And you know what? He did some good things in the game the other night and in Birmingham. And then tonight, I thought he had a little bit rougher go, but I think there was some heavy touches and a couple things there, here and there, but his energy level was good. And he gave them what they needed, at least in terms of pushing and defending, playing two ways. And that's an important part of what Bob asks a lot of players. So Alex, I'd like just maybe your final thoughts on the season as a whole. I mean, like I said, a lot of ups and downs. It was strange because they got off to such a great start. It was all this promise. We were talking about Dane Kelly, and he was 7 goals in the first 2 or 3 months. And it was, I don't know, it was an interesting year. I just thought they really, they kind of got to the finish line of the regular season and said, let's give it a go. But it feel like, it wasn't quite what it could have been.
I think that's the bow on the season. It's that it was a little bit of an underachievement compared to where things stood on paper when the season began. Then Mertz comes in, and I think a lot of us felt, okay, like this is the missing piece of the puzzle. This is the this is the midfielder that we need. Another creative player who can also play in the defensive midfield positions if Bob needs him, and break up plays and be a 90-minute box-to-box guy. And for whatever reason, the bad bounces, the mental switch-offs, whatever you want to call it, points given away at home. I couldn't even tell you how many there were after the midpoint of the season, probably a good 15 or so that they gave away in terms of wins that turned into draws or losses. And I think, one of the turning points for them that sent them on a slippery slope for a little while was the result against Red Bulls 2 at home. And they dropped their,
there's also a 2-0 lead.
Yeah, that was another 2-0 lead. And I think that, that sent them in a bit of a tailspin for a little while. They're going towards the end of the season. I think it was 1 win from 9. And they did perform better as they got closer to the playoffs. But I think, the punchline on this season is, in spite of all the signings that came in with some promise in the off season, I think there was probably an expectation that Argudo was going to produce more, having played in Major League
Other, right.
Soccer,
Hmm.
went and spent a little time overseas. And I maybe that was part of it. Maybe me, from my perspective, saying, okay, this is a guy who's still young enough where if he plays well, he can get himself back into MLS next year. And that didn't really work out for whatever reason. So I think that on paper they were constructed to win, and something just went a little off the rails as the season wore on, where the ball just didn't bounce their way. But credit to them too, though. In the playoffs, you couldn't ask for more than what they gave. They left it all out there on the field, and just couldn't get one bounce to go their way tonight.
Well, and I think that's well said, and I think you're right. I think that things had the potential to really unravel, and somehow they kept it together through that last month of the season, and they like we're in the playoff, and they fought and scrapped their way through two very exciting games. And I think this is something that the takeaway is, you know what, heading into this season, the playoff wins were scarce. They got a playoff win this year. They have the memory, the fans will have an incredible memory, that the Birmingham game. I think when we look back, that's going to be go down as one of the greatest games in the team's history. And
For sure.
obviously making a run to a final and getting further or doing really well in the Open Cup down the road. I mean, those are things that will probably supersede that, but still, I think it gave the fans hope as the season came to a close in the playoffs. I mean, I felt like it's just like that whole Birmingham game. It gave the franchise some hope and something to look forward to. That, and I honestly believe it also, in my eyes, reaffirmed my belief in this coaching staff. Not that I never doubted them, but I'm just saying, like, it's another feather in the cap in my eyes, the way that Bob Lilly got that team to pull that win off. And really come that close in Louisville. I mean, honestly, we're looking around the league. Oakland Roots go to San Antonio, and they're like they get wiped off the floor 3-0. I mean, the two matches last week too, besides the Hounds match, were one-sided. Memphis and Tampa wins. I mean, the Hounds were right there with Louisville. So I think that Louisville didn't have that kind of a match in there they didn't have an easy win in the playoffs. They had to deal with the Hounds, and the Hounds gave them everything they could. And I think that's a really good sign. And I think they get some more speedy guys with this core midfield. They need outside back and winger presence that they just didn't really have this year for the most part, especially towards the second half of the season.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's probably and I think we've talked about that a little bit. I think that finding some pace out wide is going to be likely a priority for the coaching staff going into the offseason. But again, I agree with you. I've been very high on Bob Lilly for a long time. And when he was announced as the head coach a few years ago, to me, that was the sign that Tuffy Schallenberger and the management group of the Pittsburgh Riverhounds was serious about taking the step forward from being just in the USL and having a professional soccer franchise in Pittsburgh to saying, no, we expect to be in the playoffs every year, and we expect to start fighting for, top billing for home matches in the playoffs, and that's where we want to get to. And I think that quest will continue into next year. I see no reason why, unless it's on his own volition, that Bob Lilly won't be back. And I think we've all kind of talked about how he seems to be the master tactician of lower league soccer in America, and he's taken this, everywhere he's gone in the USL. His winning percentage, the last time I checked, it was the midpoint of the season, so maybe it's dropped a little bit. It was some, absurd percentage. It was about 65%. I mean, most good managers win 45% of their games. Right. And here's Bob at 60-something%. So, I think it's kind of like, it's one of those trust the process, believe in the brand kind of things. So I think the long game they're trying to play with him is the right one.
I think so too. So, again, hopefully everything he can come back, and he's going to be back, and he'll be part with the team. I believe he signed an extension a few years ago. So yeah, I don't think he's going anywhere. But Alex, it's probably going to be tough for the Hounds fans to take, but I do think it's better than really where they were heading into the last minute of the Birmingham match, because I was ready. I had my my story pretty much. I had that story ready to go, saying it's another playoff disappointment, but they found a way. They found a way to make it to make the fans proud and have that sort of thing. So I think that they're in pretty good shape as an organization, and I think just a matter of just getting back up next year and getting themselves into position where they're a little bit of higher seed and they can make a deeper run. I think if they do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that future should be bright. Everybody should be very happy. Let's hope that they can retain a lot of the core, find some improvements at the positions that Bob Lilly feels like they need to, and somewhere in the course of the next, what's it going to be, about 5.5 months, find the fight that they had in the last 2 games, maintain that, and start closing out games next year.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Alex, thanks for joining me here on Pittsburgh Sports Live, Pittsburgh Soccer Now. We'll have more post coverage of the kind of wrap things up for the Hounds. We've got a million other things going on with high school and college soccer playoffs. It's a very exciting time. But Alex, so people know where they could find you and your show as well.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at FidSports, FYD Sports. Very simple there, unlike my last name. And then you can find me as well at Three Rivers Broadcasting. Spell it out, THREE, Three Rivers Broadcasting.com. We have the corner kick there. That airs every Monday night, and then we post it to the website. JJ and I've been doing this for a long time, even from when we were back doing it on a local little cable television station in Allentown. So we've kind of kept it going, and look forward, and hopefully we can get you on in the off season to keep talking Riverhounds.
Sounds good. Alex, again, thanks for joining me, and have a good night.
Have a good night.
All right.